Yeah, doing well.
Any? Oh, you're recording. Okay.
I'll
Was
just
that you?
I'll record to my computer. Yeah.
Oh, perfect. All right. I'm going to start letting people in. You can have chats with them, and I'll hit record. Ready?
Yes.
Okay. Welcome, everyone. We're just going to sit tight for a few more moments while we wait for a few more people to pop in and get some technical things out of the way.
Welcome, Ahmed.
So make sure you dial in on your audio so that you can unmute and speak to us. And if you can share your camera, it would be really great to see your faces.
Welcome, everyone.
So I'll just do a little intro. So this is our final session with the One Tree community offerings this October. It's been a really great season. I'm really grateful to all the facilitators who've really put in the time and energy to create this 4 series of workshops over the month. And we've all really enjoyed it, actually, and had a real nice sense of community feeling coming together and offering this. And we're with Nathan for his final offering in his Addiction Recovery and Awareness series. And the title is Human Flourishing. Is that right? Creating Authentic Community. So thank you so much, Nathan, for your time and your energy. And I'll hand over to you.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me again. It's been an amazing 4 weeks for sure, and I'm excited. I'm excited to be here. So welcome, Ahmed. Welcome, Sri Vijay, and welcome, Diane. I know that we had a little bit of a changing of the time, so I'm glad that you guys were able to find us. So I'm excited. I mean, today is kind of inspired by the One Tree community. Really, we're in a minute. I'll do a little bit of a recap of where we've gotten to at this point. But it really is the desire to create a community around the principles that happen when you're able to kind of transcend your own individual point of view and your own individual perspective, which is so much at the heart of the addiction, is a kind of an obsessive kind of focus on the world from your point of view. So let's get into the content, and we can continue to unfold this conversation as we go on. But I'd love to, as we go on, I'd love to hear your guys' feedback about what you can see works and doesn't work when you're creating community, and maybe what your experience of the sessions that you've attended during this month have been. You can see my screen, yes? Can you see my screen, Jan?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay. So, today is about human flourishing, right? Creating authentic community, right? And that really is pointing at who we get to be as individuals at the level of community, right? It's developing a certain kind of awareness where you're able to think globally. And we're going to go through kind of how we arrived at that over the last couple of weeks, starting with addiction, which I said a second ago is a very self-centered kind of way of looking at the world and perceiving your own life. So this is part of the One Tree community. For the last month, we have been having a series of talks from all different types of practitioners about lots of different approaches to health and wellness and spirituality and alignment. It really is, an amazing, extraordinary community. And if you think about the tree as the community, right, we're all individual branches as part of one community. And so, today is really an exploration and a discovery of dialogue around what it looks like to create that one tree in a way that's authentic and feeds the community itself. So these are the offerings that we've had. So for those of you who are here, I do recommend and invite you to go back to the Facebook page, and there's a streamed recording of each one of the sessions, and it's a really it's an amazing way to kind of go and experience all the different sort of holistic approaches to health and spirituality that are there from all the different practitioners. So it's a really all the sessions were recorded onto the Facebook page. So please go back and experience some of the other sessions. So I'll just introduce myself briefly. So my name is Nathan McCullough, and I am a person that's in long-term recovery from alcohol and different drugs. Now I'm an integrative nutritionist and a holistic health coach. And I said I'm a spiritually curious being, meaning, my wife is from northern India, and she's part of the Sikh tradition. My father's a Methodist minister in the U.S. I have a master's degree in philosophy, so I studied a lot of Taoism and Buddhism and just a lot of different traditions. And so, I've always been very curious about the principles that are underlying all these different approaches to seek truth. And so that's kind of what gives my way of thinking and my way of being, is this kind of curiosity and wonder at what it means to be human and what are some of the truths that we all seek. And my sort of deep commitment at the moment is a transformation of the global conversation around addiction. I really do believe that there is an approach to addiction that takes that takes seriously the experience of someone who's dealing with addiction in a way where we can deal with it much more effectively, not by treating it as a problem or as a disease, but actually getting to the root cause of what's going on and being able to give people different strategies for that. So we started off in the first week. The topic was actually redefining addiction. And my approach to addiction has always been one where addiction is more of a spectrum, right? It's somewhere that we all fall on. And that addiction really does serve a purpose, right? It fulfills a need, but it also covers up a pain that when it's revealed, it offers up a kind of opportunity for both suffering in the ancient sense of really undergoing something deeply, right? That's kind of the root context of suffering is the deep undergoing of something, which also allows for healing. So as you go into these waters, it provides a journey that leaves us face to face with the things that we fear the most, but ultimately the ability to uncover through that process a very, very deep possibility for transformation. And that really is kind of where we've gotten up to now. And I believe that through that transformational process, it really does open up an opportunity to be in relationship with other human beings. So we put the past in the past, right? And then we unfolded a new future. And today is like when you've unfolded a new future from nothing, it gives you the opportunity to create something in that space, right? So today we're going to talk about what we're going to create in that space. So we've talked about a 3-step process for developing self-awareness. And up until now, we haven't really talked about what that has meant, right? This developing of self-awareness. Because the 3 talks up until now have really been about kind of stripping away and dismantling the interpretation of the story that we have about who we are, right? The self. So the first session was about really completing the past, right? Taking your past out of your future. Right? We've talked about that as human beings. We have a particular kind of, you can call it a consciousness if you want, but that our future is generally given by the past, right? Things happen to us. We make up a story about who we are, and then we project that into the future, and then we live into the past, essentially. That's the future is really the past that we're just sort of reliving. And when you're able to take your past out of your future and put it back where it belongs, it opens up a new space. And that's where the rewriting of the future comes in, right? You can create a new story about who you are and a new story about the way that the world is, in a way that really calls forth and creates new possibilities for yourself and for your life. And that's where this element of community can come in, right? It's really creating an environment of people and a particular way of living that causes everybody to kind of raise their standards of living and communication, such that the focus of the communication and in the practices of the community are designed to feed the community itself, with a certain kind of understanding that when the community is watered or filled up, then that takes care of the individuals. Versus, as isolated individuals, we tend to think of a community as a collection of people, right? But what we're going to talk about today is kind of thinking about community in a different way. It's not a collection of individuals. It's a living organism, right? And that it does have certain elements, but that if you think about it from a holistic point of view, you think about the community first, and then the individual second. So let's start off by talking about what I mean by self-awareness and understanding the self at the level of community. Okay, so the last couple of weeks we've kind of looked at how when you're in especially when you're in addiction, right? It's a very much a myopic view of life. It's like just surviving life, right? Just getting by each day, and you're looking at everything through the lens of me, right? It's very, very self-centered in that sense. And as you're going through the path of recovery and the path of healing, there's this kind of opening up and this blossoming up of being aware of other perspectives, being aware of other points of view, starting to open up and developing more levels of openness and compassion. And so you start with yourself, and then you can start rebuilding relationships with people in your family and your friends. And as your awareness sort of grows out, you can develop a kind of global perspective. But it starts with understanding that the I, right, the you, is what we're called a superstition, meaning it's something that has been made up. It's not founded on anything, right? So as you strip away these layers of, you can call it the ego or the identity or the small self, there is the ability for this awareness of the larger self, right? We're going to talk about that today as understanding the self at the level of community. It really expands beyond your understanding of yourself as an isolated individual, and you start understanding that there is a you, or an understanding of the self that actually starts at this kind of communal and actually beyond kind of awareness that can be developed. So we'll kind of take that as a jumping off point and talk about the importance of community in the process of transformation. So for those of you who are here that are coming from the recovery community, like for example, if we look at like the 12-step tradition, for example, right? You look at AA, things like that, these sort of traditional recovery communities. There are essentially two elements that sometimes people collapse. One is the practice, and that is in the 12-step tradition. That's the 12 steps, right? You go through each one of the steps along the way, and it's designed to really do this to do the same type of thing that we've been talking about. Identify where all of your agitations come from, right? All of your guilt, all of your resentments, all of your anger, your jealousy. Start identifying where those live in your relationships in your life, and then map them out, right? Figure out who are the people in your life that you have these sort of emotions with, and then you go back into the people that you have harmed in any way in your life, and you start repairing those relationships, right? And then it keeps layering out until you're able to then get complete with the things that have that are in your past that allow you to really start thinking about and creating a new future for yourself. That's like the work, right? That's kind of the path that of the practices that are there. And then the other thing that makes the 12-step tradition really powerful is there's the fellowship. Okay, so the rooms, if you will, or the meetings that are there, that's actually a fellowship of other human beings that are also on the path, right? And the fellowship or the community is designed to be a structure that supports people that are on the path of recovery, right? If you're someone here that's been in recovery and you're like me, the first 5, nearly 10 years that I was on the recovery process, I was trying to do it on my own. And I didn't understand at that time that it's not simply a process of just overcoming, whatever your urges and impulses are to use. It really is much deeper than that. And when I was able to submit to, a mentor, and I was able to really go and be part of a community, I started understanding I'm not alone. I started giving back to the community. I started understanding that, wow, this is actually, there's something here that is much bigger and much broader. And there's something really beautiful that happens when you come together in community and you share. Meaning you share your own personal experience. And you listen to other people share their own personal experience. And when that happens, you start getting opened up to maybe the pain or the suffering or the struggle that other people have, and you start hearing your own experience in other people's stories. You start hearing your own self be recreated in other people's communities or communication. And when you do that enough, what happens is you start realizing that, wow, I'm that person's just like me, and I'm just like them. And it kind of opens up this seed of awareness that you can actually arrive at some point, and you realize that there is no difference between, I'm just you living a different life. I might have a different story and a different level, different experiences that I've gone through, but it starts to really plant the seed that, well, maybe there isn't the difference between us that we think is there. When we see people for their gender, their color, their neighborhoods that they came from, everything that makes them unique is oftentimes what we see first. And when people share and they open up, we can see a deeper level of what's going on. And that's where our shared humanity comes in, is we look past the things that make us, maybe unique individuals. We're able to look past that and see the commonality. And that is really what community makes available during the transformation process. Is once you get past just dealing with your own stuff, we'll say, your own ego, when you're in community, it allows you to start understanding that awareness that, wow, there are other people. Wow, they're just like me. Wow, I can identify with this person. And there's this kind of blossoming of the awareness that happens. And that's really only possible in the community. And then the other thing that the community does do is that when you're in a community, oftentimes there are people that are a little bit farther along in the journey than maybe you are. And these are the people that can provide what we call accountability, meaning they have perspective and they can hold space for you when there is something that, for example, they can see that you can't see, because again, we're all connected, right? So they are you living a different life, but they've been where you are, and they can hold space for something that you can't really see for yourself in that moment. And we talked in week 1. But the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, right? It's not the absence of the thing that's the problem with identifying addiction with whatever the substance is. We think that the opposite of that, or the recovery of that, is the absence of that substance. And that is a very, very shallow understanding of what addiction is and what drive addictions. So if you think of addiction as the unresolved trauma and the pain that comes from things that are unhealed, then the opposite of that in the recovery process is really connection, right? Understanding that you're not an isolated individual that suffers alone. That actually you are at the core connected to other human beings. And that's really where the community and the fellowship aspect, specifically in the recovery process, comes in, is it provides that connection. It provides that fellowship. And you also work with other, the sponsor or mentor, or other people that are, have been along the path. Sometimes we call them gurus, like people that have the level of awareness that can help be a light or a guide as we're going through that process. And so that's where, that's one of the big elements of community and fellowship. And so those are some of the core principles that I want to kind of use as a jumping off point as we go along this process. Now, the next element that I want to talk about is the role of service when you're creating fellowship. And especially for people that are relatively new in a community or new in a fellowship, we come in, like I said, so myopically focused on ourselves that when we come into the community, it's like we're still really locked in that ego frame of mind. And service is something that begins to develop the compassion, and it begins to develop the other awareness, and it begins to develop this ability to understand that actually you are here as part of something larger, and start thinking about the way that your actions impact the community, the way that your actions impact others, the fact that you do have something to offer, the fact that there is something that you can contribute. And these are all things that many of us, especially early in the recovery path, we don't think that we have anything to contribute. We don't think that we have anything that we can provide in terms of helping other people. And so I can't understate the role of service in any spiritual community. I think of AA and different approaches to recovery as fundamentally a spiritual community. So whether you're in a temple or you're in a you're in a recovery room, at the end of the day, the principles are actually very much the same. There's a different mechanism going on, but the principles are very much the same, as we'll see where we end up today in the conversation. And that's why, for me, the last couple of weeks maybe haven't been what most people are used to traditionally when they think about addiction recovery. But our conversation has really been geared towards these principles that underlie, helping people get out of their own individual story and start developing these broader levels of awareness. I really believe that is the recovery process. And that's why I believe very strongly that there is something very powerful that is made possible by someone who has had to deeply deal with their own demons, if you will, and really go through the suffering process. Is I think that it really accelerates the opportunity for kind of transcendent awareness. Because for most people, that if you don't undergo a deep amount of suffering, or you don't have to really deal with a lot of those stuff, you can live your whole life without having to really go into those deeper areas that allow for wider transformation. So that's why I think in the recovery process is a seed of something that's that can lead to an extraordinary transformation. So I wanted to tie in, some of the other talks that have gone on this week, and I'd love to hear from some of the people that are here today about what you are hearing for yourself. But as I was listening, for example, to Chris's talks on the Viharas, I was really left with a vision for what is possible in community, and the kind of the kind of characteristics of the individuals that are in the community, but ultimately the community becomes an embodiment of these same principles, right? So if you think about what human flourishing is, it's, in my mind, it's the ability to understand humanity and look at, each individual in each community through the lens of our common humanity, right? The ability to understand, what it means to see yourself and to see God, if you will, in each individual, and have that be a place where you come from. And as I was listening, to what Chris was talking about in terms of developing the loving kindness and the compassion and the joy and the equanimity, it really was an amazing embodiment of what I see in the recovery process that becomes possible as people get out of their self-identification and they begin to really have themselves be given by and be defined by the community first. And equanimity, for example, is a beautiful experience that comes out of doing the deeper work, right? We all have these kind of internal agitations, right? We're given by, if you've been to the Vipassana retreats or in that tradition, you're either in this state of craving or aversion, right? You're always in the reaction or the response mode all of the time, and that has you kind of in that way, right? And addiction is very much the same thing. You're in the throes of craving and aversion, right? It's like craving something and then guilt and shame and all of the stuff that comes with that leads to more craving, and you're kind of in that cycle. And in the recovery process, whether it's meditation that you're using or yoga that you're using or mindfulness that you're using, it's all designed to help you just be with the cravings that are there and not be at the effect of them, in a way where if you're left with equanimity, then they're not looking to fill up any hole or anything like that, right? You're left in a state of peace. And joy, as I understand it, in the process, is actually the celebration that's made possible, like celebrating other people's successes. And again, it's not a kind of a hedonistic pleasure kind of joy, or just a shallow kind of happiness. But it's joy at the level of community. It's joy in the sense of wanting and seeing and celebrating the success of others, and having that be what you're given by. And then obviously compassion is something that is developed, right? It's something that you are again thinking of the other first. There's this kind of other-centered awareness that begins to become possible, and that is that is how I think about compassion. I don't think about in compassion as simply being nice or anything like that. Sometimes compassion requires that you show the mirror to people, and be able to help be with them through that process. But it's an understanding of someone else's experience. And I do feel, yes, this is our own personal journey as we're going through the recovery process. But ultimately, as your awareness goes from the level of the individual to the level of the community, these values actually become imbued in the community itself. So there's sort of this reciprocal relationship where it becomes part of the community, and then you start understanding yourself through the community instead of the individual. So I would be interested to hear, from the people that are here today, like what is opening up for you? Like what are you hearing for for yourself, and what are your own experiences? If you've gone through the recovery process, how has community or fellowship shown up for you, and what do you hear for yourself today, maybe that you've seen in this month with the One Tree community, or anything along those lines? Is there anybody that would be willing to share?
So you're welcome to unmute yourself and speak to us, or you can type in the chat box. Yeah, I mean, I really, again, love what you're saying. I completely connect. You speak my language. And I really agree with you when you say that going through it, a lot of internal suffering,
Mm-hmm.
it's almost a requirement to sort of pop out of your own bubble, right? To seek other ways and to see outside of yourself. And I really experienced that in my own life. And that's still, I see my suffering mind, actually. And even during this whole month has been a huge mirror for me as well. It's been raising a lot of things from my subconscious,
Mm-hmm.
and little voices that I'm just, more than aware of right now, that I know is coming from my past and how I was brought up,
Mm-hmm.
very sort of self-centered, fearful of the future, all the primal attitudes of self-survival coming up, and what am I going to get from this?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, why did I create this so there's this higher mind in me that I created this for a reason, or something inside of me is wanting to explore this and really go beyond the limitations of my own thought process. But it's been an interesting month to really just see that inner voice popping up with its own cries, and it's been quite a turbulent journey for me, I have to say. Some real ups, like really heartwarming ups,
Uh-huh.
and some like complete energy crashes, throughout the week. So I've just been with that whole process and not really thinking or overanalyzing it. But
Yeah.
for me, overall, this process has been quite expanding, I would say.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Yeah, that's
and
beautiful.
it's
That's part of. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, but that's part of why. It's good what you're saying, right? Because it puts it on the court in reality. So it's very easy sometimes to be part of a community, but participate at the level of a spectator, and feel like that you're kind of part of the community, which obviously you are. But that's actually not what I'm trying to point at, right? I'm trying to point at something which is, it's kind of an understanding of self at the level of community, which doesn't allow you to sit by as simply as a spectator, right? It's an active kind of awareness where you're thinking about everything from the level of community. And what you've done is very interesting, right? So you have created something, and then anytime that you create something, especially if it's a community, what immediately will show up is your individual's desire to not want that anymore, right? So that you'll get that sort of tension between what you've created at the level of the individual, and then this higher awareness that you have of what you're creating will often come in that dynamic tension. And that shows up with like, oh, what am I doing? Why did I even do this? Or it's not going to work, and all of that kind of the turbulence, as you said, that comes up. So that's a beautiful example of exactly what I'm saying, which is a little bit. I have trouble sometimes articulating it, because it's kind of an abstract idea. So what you're saying really puts it on the court. So what are some of the thoughts that you've had along the way?
oh gosh. um, yeah, I mean, it's that there's definitely a feeling inside me that feels like being really rinsed, and I remember having this talk a lot, especially with the spiritual practitioners in Bali, Ubud, a lot about self-worth and self-value and, charging for things. Don't give everything for free. And you
Mm-hmm.
don't value yourself if you do that. But whenever I offered things by donation or for free, I never even had that thought in my mind. You know what I mean? It was just, it felt good to give, and I genuinely enjoyed the process of it. But then in the process of discussing these people saying that you don't value yourself and that you're devaluing yourself when you give, then somehow they planted some seed that wasn't questioning what do they, am I doing that? Am I devaluing myself? And then suddenly that feeling of being squeezed started to come inside of me. You know what I mean? Instead of being able to just offer from the heart and enjoying the process of offering, then there was this question in my mind of, maybe I should charge. So I went through this process of like, what is my value? What is my value? And then trying to put a value on what I'm offering. But the whole thing felt so unnatural to me. And I even felt uncomfortable putting a value on what I was offering. And I think because my energy was uncomfortable with it, it didn't work, Um, I don't know where I was going with that, but somehow
Oh,
I felt the joy of just giving. And
yeah.
somehow that was disrupted a bit by that conversation around self-worth, which I still, they make it almost like a big spiritual topic. You must have good self-worth and put a price tag on what you're giving. But somehow I feel that is creating a limitation or capsule suffering within yourself. That then you won't give for less, or it somehow it didn't work for me. I don't know if you have experience around self-worth and money and things like that, or how this relates to the topic today. Because
Yeah.
for me, there's a real joy in literally giving without thought of return, and in that giving, which is coming from the heart, there is a deep receiving that's happening. And when the thoughts come up of, am I really rinsing myself? That's also an opportunity to really see that voice and let it go, which is how I've been sort of managing it in the past. And I don't know myself that's the right approach, but it's the approach that resonates with me at the moment and in the past. Sorry, my light's just totally gone out. All right, over to you. Be interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, I think it's great, right? So you're talking about, at some level, you're talking about sustainability as well, right? So when you have a community, how do you sustain the community? If you're living in, the town that you're in, you do need lights, along the street to make sure that people are safe. You do need, someone who goes around and collects the trash and the garbage, and you need different things that are required in order to sustain the community itself. And I think it's a very interesting question to come up with how that is done. And I think there's been a lot of really interesting different models that come up. I don't think that the answer to this is self-evident or clear, and I don't think that there is a right or wrong answer. But I think there is a certain I believe that there is a certain kind of, let's say, an entrepreneurial spirit mixed with these kind of principles that is starting to show up, where people are finding these very interesting answers to what you're talking about, is creating the sustainability of a big community through whether it's donation or service or different aspects of that. But I think that certainly it's an open question. But I think you do have to be careful when you're talking about the self-worth thing, because if you're looking at it through a lens of capital, where it's about what can be created in that sense, you just have to be aware of who's speaking, right, in each one of these conversations. So that's why this dynamic tension between the individual and the community is so important, to pay attention to where your awareness and where your speaking is coming from, because we're all human, right? So we'll slip back and forth into the self, the things that are good for the self as perceived from me and and then what's good for the community itself. So I that's probably doesn't give you an answer to your question, but I think it's an interesting question that requires discovery, and it requires thinking about it deeply with other people who have done these types of things, and come and ask them what have they come up with as an answer, because I certainly believe that if we're going to create communities that are sustainable, it requires a contribution of some kind from each member of the community that's able to give in their current situation, and that contribution could look different from each person. We all have something to give, we all have something to contribute, and that could be someone cleaning the table at a community event. It could be someone who greets people at the door. There's an ecosystem that goes into every community, and the putting on of whether it's it's events or ritual ceremonies, whatever the case may be, they're all things that are unfolded with other human beings involved, and everybody has a contribution to that. And for some people, it might be a financial contribution that they're able to make, in that sense as well. So I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer, but I certainly think it's a good question to ask. I hope that's helpful in some way.
Yeah, for sure. We have a question from Anastasia.
Yes.
Maybe more specific to addiction. So how to find out what happened in past which created this addiction? So I don't know if we can revisit some previous topics from the last
Yes. Yeah, so there's a couple of, we can talk about that a little bit now, but ultimately you could also go back and listen to the last 2 weeks, Anastasia, have been all about that. Because that really is the work. You can't think at the level of community if you're dealing with unresolved trauma, because trauma exists in the past, and if it's unresolved, it means you're actually stuck in the past. So generally speaking, what we've gone through is that things happen, and trauma is not the event, right? So something bad happened, right? Trauma is the story or the meaning that got made up or attached to that event that happened. So let's say you're a kid and you get hit, right? It's not a traumatic event. What happened is what happened. The trauma lives in the story about what you made that mean about you, and what you made it mean about, let's say, your parents, or usually there's also a global decision that's made at that point where people can't be trusted, or there's something that's bigger that gets decided. I'm not good enough and the world is dangerous, something like that. So that becomes a filter through which you live your life. And without, this is totally unconscious, right? But you'll notice in your speaking, it will come up from time to time. And when you encounter other people or situations, what immediately will happen in your body a lot of times, or in your physiology, there'll be a fear, right? And that's a fear response, because the world is a dangerous place. And so it really does require you being able to go back and identify what were those kind of foundational moments. What were those moments where something happened and you made up, you attached a meaning or an interpretation about yourself and about others. Because that's actually the way that our identity, like we were talking earlier about stripping away the layers of the ego and the identity, that is your identity. Your identity is the story that you've sort of woven together. It's kind of like a tapestry that you've woven together out of not the things that have happened to you, but the meaning that you've attached to those things, and that becomes this kind of intricate web of stories, and that becomes who you are. So as we're doing this work, that's what we're undoing, until you get to the point where actually you recognize that you are not, you are none of those things. You are nothing in that sense, and that it allows you to then create from the future instead of creating from the past, and that's where the limitless kind of possibilities comes up. So that's where the work is. You have to go back and you have to identify those moments where the where you attach meaning to things. And then the work is to go back and have the conversations with people, or to get whatever is required to resolve that trauma. That's what will then free you up. And oftentimes it does require working with other people, because a lot of times we have blind spots, right? There's things that we can't see, like our mind very, 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 very effectively and strategically hides them away in our conscious, in our subconscious, and sometimes we don't have access to these things, because it would be just too painful, really, to go through life dealing with that all the time. So you kind of do have to work with somebody where you can come face to face with those things in kind of a loving environment and be able to resolve them. So I hope that helps. I mean, I think if you look back, you can start to really identify the situations where that happens. Does that help, Anastasia?
Thumbs up.
What's that?
She's given a thumbs up.
Oh, thumbs up. Yeah, so you go back and listen to the second and the third session. The second session was about putting your past in the past, and the third session was what are the possibilities that open up when you've put the past in the past. Anybody else have anything that they want to share about that?
I noticed Liesel's in the room. I don't know if you're at your computer, Liesel, if you want to join in the conversation around trauma. My question around that, what you shared just now, is how important is it to find the exact cause, from the past, whether we can just sit with the stories that come up in the moment. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
The stories are, the past isn't really in the past. The past is the present moment, thought or memory that is arising with the emotions, right? Mm-hmm. So can it just be sitting into what is arising in the moment with our thoughts, our memories, our emotions, our physiology, our sensation, mm-hmm. and just allowing this, becoming more aware of the story, which is, in past mode, but actually very much in the present, coming up as a present moment memory or story of the past, and not getting too attached with trying to find what happened in the past, right. But just seeing what pops up and then seeing and letting it go. Because I feel like you can get into a real loop by digging through your past, trying to get where. See what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I agree with you 100%. That can be a bit of a red herring, because you're right. I mean, the past is not in the past. The past is actually right now in your speaking, and in your experience. So it is something that can be resolved, and you don't have to go back and identify the exact thing. We kind of use that model just to understand that there is a filter through which you're looking at the world, and it is given by something. And those are the things that are unresolved. And so, you have a kind of point of view or a perspective about who you are and the way that the world is. And it got formed at some point, right? So I'm not saying, you take a kind of Freudian, psychoanalyzing your past or anything. That's more also kind of myopically focusing on the problem, which is definitely not what we want to do. But oftentimes I will say that, what's required is a letting go. and what's required is, you know, a releasing of these things, and forgiveness and things like that. So a lot of times it does require being in communication with people sometimes. You know, like if you look in the 12-step tradition, the process of making reparations is not simply just going back and apologizing for the things that you've done. It is this process of kind of taking responsibility for things, and then opening up a space where you can forgive yourself, you can forgive others, and so that you can move on. So I think, yeah, I mean, when you get as you get further on down the path, I do believe that it becomes a little bit easier for you to be able to just notice, bring into your awareness, let that go. But oftentimes, when people are, especially if you're in the beginning of the recovery process, it is it's very visceral, and so it requires some deeper work. So no, I wouldn't get hung up on identifying the exact moment, but the principle is there.
Mm. Yeah. Because I remember just going through this period of realizing like the past really is gone, and what is coming up is a conception or idea of the past
Hmm.
that needs to be seen clearly, and to see for this in this moment, um, does this complex of beliefs or ideals based on the past memory, does it serve me right now, or what effect does it have right now in this moment on my emotions, my nervous system, and just trying to see the wider scope of that pocket of thoughts and beliefs from which you can say is in past mode
Hmm.
on now. I think Liesel's just said happy to chat. If you want to share something, Liesel.
I'm unmuting myself, but I'm not sure whether you can hear me. Do you?
We can hear you.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I love the way that Nathan talks about this, because, trauma is something from the past, and the experience of that trauma is felt in the present moment. And, this is, it's the past having an impact on the present.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really worthwhile to really understand this and to kind of contextualize it like that. But what is slightly different between the way that I generally work with trauma and the way you work with trauma, Nathan, from what I'm understanding,
Mm-hmm.
is that for me, understanding all the triggers from the past is not that important. The most important thing is to really be able to encounter whatever the sensation is. And here we're talking about a physical sensation in this moment,
Mm-hmm.
right? And for me, it's not an either or approach. So I'm not saying, okay, but my approach is the right way, because I view it more as an and.
Yeah.
I think for many people, it's incredibly useful to be able to go back and look at the story and try and understand the meaning that they attach to the story and how that has kind of shaped their life moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
But within that, I also understand that just going back and understanding why that experience was traumatic does not resolve the charge in the system
Mm-hmm.
in this moment.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's really and. I love that we can go back and we can go and remember. And there are times that I've worked with people who are traumatized by what we can call implicit memories.
Mm-hmm.
So these are things that they're not consciously carrying a conscious memory imprint of. So it might have been their birth experience.
Mm-hmm.
If in the Hindu tradition, it might have been a past life, right? It could have been anything that they do not consciously have a memory of. So the challenge with an implicit memory is the trauma is still there, even though you can't find the story that may have created that trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And so the trauma is still there, and the impact on the individual in terms of that. Very often our trauma stories become our identification. It becomes the lens through which our ego is created, right?
Mm-hmm.
So even though I might not have the story, this is not a dead end. It's possible to work simply with whatever sensations are arising in that moment in the body. But this is very much from a somatic experiencing kind of perspective and angle.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I love the way that that trauma is being addressed these days in a very real way.
Mm.
That it's something, that we understand is really useful in terms of finding our way back to ourselves, you see,
Mm.
which is really where we're going, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of finding our way back.
Yes.
Yeah,
Return to love.
yeah.
Yeah, I think it was. I'm not sure if it was last week or the week before. We actually were talking about you as well, Liesl, because there is a tendency at times for people to think about, let's say, awareness and consciousness in terms of the mind, and understanding in terms of the mind as well. And one of the things that I think does get missed in that process is understanding that consciousness, awareness, is not a strictly mental thing, right? It is something that lives in the whole organism. And I think in my personal opinion, I think you're dead on about this. Oftentimes, our best access to, especially the disturbances that are going on, let's say in our mind and our thinking, is through the body, because there's an immediacy that is happening in the moment that we are not conscious of. And so oftentimes, like, I know for myself, if I'm feeling, let's say, hot, or I'm having an anxious feeling, it lives in my body way before I ever become consciously aware of what's actually happening. And so the process of being able to become aware of this, the subtle body, right? This subtleness often lives in our body. And so it becomes an access that you may actually never be aware of what actually happened, or the meaning that was made up. But resolving it does become possible when you're able to identify that there's a disturbance going on, and doing that work. So I think you're really right about that.
Mm. Yeah, and for me, I love that you talk about building communities. And I apologize for only kind of arriving halfway through the conversation. But this for me has become a very real, embodied understanding that that there is enormous value in the way that we can support one another. And so just the possibility that we could create communities that may in fact change the way that the world is at the moment.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's beautiful. I do. I'll take that as sort of a jumping off point to kind of go into the next thing, and then and complete, because I actually I have to lead another talk. For those of you who like ACIM, the Course in Miracles, I lead a Course in Miracles group on Sundays. But like what Liesl was saying, and it's great that this has come up here, right? Because our communities, as we often think about them, are based in the past, right? We build communities around our identification with the things that have happened to us, and those are where we go to work. And what we're talking about when it comes to creating authentic communities is, when you don't have that past-based interpretation, identification about who you are, and you have this more open perspective, then you can build a community where the identification that you have is at the level of the community, and what it is that you're creating, and the awareness that you have is not about what I and me and my can get, but it's actually about the building of the community itself. And that's where, if we come all the way through this process, that the work, the deeper work when it comes to recovery and the releasing of trauma and the disidentification of the way that the way that you see yourself now based on the past, it leads to this moment where you can engage in a community with other people in a way where it's a purely creative process with people who you're identifying with at a deeper level. So I just want to kind of end on this. So there's for those of you who might know George Bernard Shaw, this is one of my favorite quotes, and he says that this is the true joy in life, the being used for a purpose, recognized by yourself as a mighty one, the being a force of nature instead of a feverish, selfish little clod of ailments and grievances, complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy. I am of the opinion that my life belongs to the whole community, and as long as I live it is my privilege to do for it whatever I can. I want to be thoroughly used up when I die, for the harder I work, the more I live. I rejoice in life for its own sake. Life is no brief candle for me. It's a sort of splendid torch, which I have got a hold of for the moment, and I want to make it burn as brightly as possible before handing it on to future generations. And this quote really encapsulates for me, my journey in the beginning. I really was a feverish, selfish little clod of ailments and grievances, when I was going through my recovery process in the beginning. And I do believe that it is this work that we're doing that allows to create an authentic community where really our future does hang in the balance. I mean, if we are able to create leadership and to create communities and to create a certain awareness where, we're making decisions based on what's best for the planet, what's best for the human community, then we'll survive. And if we don't, we won't. And I think that, that may be kind of an interesting way of thinking about it, but I really do believe that it isn't that important that we do this work and we create authentic communities and we're able to really participate in these types of conversations, because I really do believe that our planet and our human family really depends on thinking at this level, right? Thinking about things globally. And when I say global, I mean taking the whole in consideration as the lens through which we're thinking about what actions to take as individuals. And I do think that we're at a place, in our world at the moment where things can go in either direction, and we have to really take these conversations seriously and participate with each other in as many conversations as we can, and do this work ourselves as individuals so that we can be part of a community authentically. And I'll end the way that we end last time, and that is with, honoring each other. I think this is the work, right? I honor the place in you that is the same as it is in me. I honor the place in you where the entire universe dwells. I bow to the place in you that is love, light, and joy. And when you and I bow to our true nature, we are one. My soul recognizes your soul. We are the same. We are one. And I really do believe that that is a place where we can arrive in the journey, where there is a recognition that we're all just, the same, living different lives. And that is an awareness through which we can live authentically and in community with each other. And I do believe that, in the recovery process, this is something that becomes profoundly available in potentially a deeper way than if you didn't have to deal with, what you dealt with. So I'm very grateful to be someone who is in long-term recovery. I'm grateful for the journey that I've been through, and the communities that have held me up when I was not, able to really hold myself up in that moment. And I'm grateful for this community and being able to be part of this conversation. So I love you all, and thanks for coming and being part of this conversation. I hope it's the first of many. And Jan, I really want to acknowledge you in particular for the work, that you've put into this process. I know what it takes to put on events like this, and it's not easy, And so thank you for dealing with whatever you had to deal with to put this together. And yeah, it's just amazing.
Thank you, Nathan. And yeah, thank you again so much for your energy and your time and your charisma. I love listening to you speak. It's just so energizing.
I found one trick.
Yeah. I love the tree behind you. And thank you, Liesel, so much for your offerings this month. Amit was on the line, but I think his data just ran out. Thank you, Amit. He's in the other room. And Chris sent his love to everyone. He had a class, so we couldn't make it, and I imagine the others had plans. It was a bit of a last-minute invite to be able to facilitate. But I will catch up with you all individually and have a good chat with you all. And just to that last slide you had about the Namaste, I think like that recognition of the divine as the same essence within all of us is what is guiding me forward and guiding me to step beyond the small voice that is wanting to just, keep for itself. And through the years of suffering and releasing that suffering, I know that way is no longer available to me. You know what I mean? There's something in me that can't stomach it anymore, to believe the words of the suffering mind and to want to grasp. Like, there's just something in me that knows that has to go, and it can't be a way forward. It almost leads to self-annihilation. So that namaste, or that realization of the self within, is really, I feel the silence of it is just permeating and guiding me forward and wanting to forge that connection with others. So yeah, thank you so much.
It's beautiful, and it's a choice. You have to keep choosing it. It's not something that comes once and then you're just like bestowed with some enlightenment, that you never have to then do the work anymore. It's something that you have to, you constantly keep cultivating, keep choosing, and that's ultimately why this whole game that we're playing is worth playing, right?
Yeah, I really found this in time really satisfying, through the ups and downs, and seeing you all, being in every single session with you all. It's been really uplifting for me. So I'm really grateful.
Well, I'm grateful as well, and I'm honored to have served with you guys. And yeah, I love you. I do have to jump off, but thank you so much, really, Jan, for everything that you've done, and for Liesel for your service, and for Diane and Anastasia for coming today. And let's keep evolving.
Beautiful. Thank you. Love you all.
Bye, everybody.